It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Donna Conrad. Hi, Donna. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you.
I just looked it up. You were here November of 21, so it's been a few years. And I think
yes.
we were right in the middle of COVID, I think, at the time you were on. We did talk about Jim Morrison, and we talked about your book called House of the Moon. I remember it was an interesting conversation. There was some reference to Cass Elliot in there as well. Did you used to hang out at her house?
Yeah, up at Laurel Canyon.
Laurel Canyon, right.
I mean, everybody was up there. Everybody that was anybody was up there. And she was kind of the a driving force. She was always the welcoming, open, friendly, hey, everybody can show up and hang out no matter who you are. So that was wonderful.
The hostess with the mostess, yeah?
Exactly.
Well, every documentary I've seen on the 60s in L.A. at that time, Cass Elliott's name always comes up. That her house was sort of, Grand Central Station for musicians and anybody who was anybody at that time.
Well, and some people who were nobody, like me. I was just a teenager at the time, and yet I was welcome. It was an open door policy, and it was very inclusive. The folks up there in Laurel Canyon were musicians, but they were people first, and they welcomed most anybody.
I remember one story about Mackenzie Phillips, or she told the story that she was hanging out up there with her father and her mother, and I guess Paul McCartney was there, and she fell asleep in a hammock with Paul and never forgot that. She woke up and there was one of the Beatles next to her.
Yeah, Dad, that never happened to me, unfortunately. Yeah, but it was a halcyon time when we thought we were going to change the world for the better, and that because we believed in love and peace and togetherness, that the whole world would embrace that. And it was a beautiful dream that I still hold to, and hopefully one day it'll come about. But on top of everything, the most important thing at that time was the music.
Well, and it was great music. I think that's one problem with this generation now that they're lacking, is they don't have the music that they had in the 60s. It was completely different.
Well, music that inspires you to be better, to search more, to open your mind, to be open to new ideas.
Yeah, music has lost its soul, I think.
From what I've heard, yeah, I tend to have my old playlist, and don't venture too much into the new music. Yeah,
I haven't listened to anything since the 90s. There was that one sort of last gasp of breath of grunge and Nirvana and Stone Temple Pilots and those guys, which I really liked, and then that was it. Nail in the coffin as far as I was concerned. So all the music I listened to was from there back,
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
So anyways, you're here to talk about your new book, and your new book is called Last
Magdalene.
Oh, Magdalene.
As in Mary Magdalene.
All right. Well, why don't you tell us about this? This seems quite a bit different than...
It is different in many ways in that my memoir was things that actually happened to me and I could speak to in the first person. And this book, the protagonist, the heroine of the book comes down to us now as Mary Magdalene. but it's recasting her first-person narrative as a strong, independent, courageous, passionate woman who was a vital participant in events that changed the Western world, or what a lot of people say, the entire world. And we've always been told the story from the male perspective in the Gospels, and just thought it was about time to let her speak for herself.
So this is a historical fiction?
It is. Heavy on the history. A lot of research went into this book, so everything that could be proved is proved, and then the rest is creative fiction. You know, what they exactly said. That, of course, is fictional.
What time frame are we talking about? Like around the time of Christ?
Yes. So it takes place first century Judea, and it is a retelling, let's say, what the Publishers Weekly said that it does for the New Testament what the red tent did for the Old Testament. And so it's taking the story and one of the characters that is in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the book of John, and is mentioned more times than any other woman except Jesus' mother, and saying, okay, tell the story from your perspective. What was actually going on, and what was it like to live under the utter domination of Rome, and to live through a time when people were yearning for a king in the line of David to come and kick Rome out and rule a united Judea and Israel for 1,000 years of peace. And so it has that feeling of the hope of prophecy coming true at this time.
Well, this is very far away from Cass Elliot and Jim Morrison. Why did you decide to write this?
Well, a Magdalene scholar read one of my earlier books and said you write about very predominant women who have their own sense of themselves. And she was a Magdalene scholar, and she said, why don't you write about Mary Magdalene? And I said, she was in the Bible, wasn't she? And then I started learning about her and her actual place in history and women's place in history and how they get written out of history. And so I found in her, I guess you could say like Galilee was the Berkeley of the 60s, of the first century. And all of the revolts against the Greeks, against the Romans, came out of Galilee. And these people were saying, we're going to rule our own lives and we're going to live our lives the way we want to. And then you have this very strong woman who stands up and says, we're not going to do it the way it was done before, and we're not going to do it Rome's way. So in a way, there's a similarity between the 1960s and first century Judea.
Oh, okay. I can see that. Was there a movie made about her?
Oh, lots of them.
Yeah.
I mean, well, she was in The Last Temptation of Christ, and I think there has been several movies that involve her. But she always tends to be a side character, the sidekick. And as I say, I have her as a very strong woman who stood at the side of the men that we know now as the disciples and Jesus. She stood at their side. She wasn't a follower. She was prominent. And she helped to make the events happen that we remember today, but are mostly ascribed to the men involved.
So she
so
was...
We're back to women having a voice.
Exactly. Well, she was... What was her pitch? What was her advocacy for?
Her advocacy was for Israel to. So Israel was divided between Judea and Israel since King Solomon, and so her pitch was, we're going to have a united Israel again, and it's going to be in the line of what Solomon had, where women were valued, where the divine feminine aspect of divinity was honored, which Solomon did. In other words, the goddess was honored. And she was saying that this can happen and that she would rule as queen next to Yeshua Bar Joseph, that we know now as Jesus, next to him being king. And he was executed by Rome for his claim to be king. And so that's historically in all of the Gospels, that's what Rome condemned him of. So I'm telling the story that this was their goal. They were going to be king and queen of a united Israel. And they were going to bring back equality of worship of both the male and female aspects of divinity.
Okay. You must have had to do a lot of grueling research to put this together, yeah?
There was a lot of research. I've read the Torah, which are the Hebraic, what we consider the Old Testament, multiple times, 4 different versions of the New Testament multiple times, plus working with a Hebraic scholar from Haifa University to find out what were women's roles in first century Judea. Because you see, history got rewritten so that women had no rights in Judea, but they did. They had incredible rights, and they could inherit in their own name. They could own property. They could be married or not married, depending on what they wanted. And all of this got rewritten when the Roman Empire basically made the world Rome, and Roman women didn't have any rights. And so they just wrote them out of history. And this isn't the case. So working with this Hebraic scholar, I learned a lot about women's rights during this period, which were substantial. So yes, a lot of history went into it, and then was sprinkled lightly throughout the book, because, as you know, any writer, our job is to entertain and to tell a good story. So, but what can be proved is proved in the book.
You know, it's funny, when you were saying that, you reminded me of a guest that I had on the show a while ago. I don't remember his name, but he found an old copy somewhere of the Bible that had been written in Greek, and he translated it into English, which would have been an arduous task, I think, in itself, because it would have been 2,000-year-old Greek to begin with. It wouldn't be like modern Greek, I don't think. But he said that once it was translated, he said it was quite different. And when you were talking about rewriting history, I mean, he said that it didn't bear a lot of resemblance to, let's say, the King James Bible, you know, which I found interesting.
Exactly. Well, it is, and if you think about the evolution of Christianity, and even you mentioned the King James version of the New Testament, and it was written to glorify King James, to glorify, that was a slip, glorify.
Good word.
To glorify, yeah, I know. To glorify a male dominant ruler who wanted everybody to behave in a certain way and to honor him. And some of the original Gnostic Gospels that have been uncovered, some of the original texts written in Coptic, which is first century, are quite different. And they stress the acceptance, inclusion, love, tolerance. And yet, if you're a ruling king, starting with Constantine, you don't want people to do that. You want them to obey. You want them to fear both you and God. And so you change the text. And I have 4 versions of the New Testament, and going even from the King James Version to the American Standard Version, it's like reading different books.
Yeah.
Let alone if you go back to the original Aramaic and Greek that was written.
It's amazing. So people have basically, I guess the moral of that story is that people have basically used the scriptures for their own benefit, for their own profit.
Exactly. And if you look at what has come down to us as being the teachings of Yeshua Bar Joseph, who is Jesus, the Nazarene, by the way, not of Nazareth. Nazareth didn't exist at that time, but that's a whole nother topic. All these towns were renamed, just like Mary Magdalene. There was no town of Magdala in the first century. So her title was Miriam the Magdalene, and Magdalene was a title of a priestess. And the Magdalene was a high priestess. But in late 1st century, 2nd century, when the Hebrew sect that was led by Yeshua Bar Joseph started turning into Christianity, they went back and renamed towns. And so they renamed them Magdala, and they renamed them Nazareth, but that wasn't their name at the time. So you're getting more of a history lesson than you wanted.
Well, that's all right. It's interesting, but I'm curious why you decided to do this. I mean, this is not just some sort of light and fluffy little thing that you would write on a Saturday. I mean, this is a major project, you know?
It's a major commitment,
yeah.
And it's a 4-book series. So the first book takes place solely in Judea and Galilee. The book that I'm working on now, The Lost and the Holy, takes place in Alexandria, which was the traditional place for Hebrews to go into exile. You know, we have that in the Gospels, that Jesus was taken there as a baby, and that to get away from Judea and Galilee. So it's a huge commitment, but I feel that once I learned more and more about women in the 1st century in Judea, the rights they had in Egypt, I felt it a deep commitment to let people know that the story they've been told for 2,000 years has a different take on it that could be far more liberating than what's been foisted upon people. And if you think of the teachings of Yeshua that have come down to us, they all revolve around love, around tolerance, around acceptance. So to turn something that was based on those precepts into something that is hateful and exclusive, and you kill somebody if they don't believe what you believe in, I feel it's time for people to re-examine that and to think, wait a minute, let's go back to what was originally said, not what we've been fed for 2,000 years by people who wanted to control and intimidate us. Yeah. Again, kind of back to the 60s, don't you think?
Well, it does. It does sort of come full circle. Yeah. It's just, I'm very impressed that you decided to bite off something as grand as this to do, because if you're going to do 4 books, you said?
Yes.
This is going to take you probably years, wouldn't it?
Well, in theory, the books are going to come out every April. And so this next book, The Lost and the Holy, will come out in April of 25. Okay. And since a lot of the research is done, now it's just carrying forward Miriam's journey when she's in Alexandria. And the 3rd book, A Woman Unto Herself, takes place in Gaul. And then the 4th book is going to be the Song of Sarah, which is her daughter's retelling of it from a completely different perspective. You know, from a young child who witnessed what was going on and had a mother that was so intense and renowned and notorious, and what that was like being a young child going from Judea to Alexandria to Gaul to being married into a prominent family. So, yeah, it's a big adventure.
So do you have anything else going on in your life?
Nothing else.
Nothing else. Yeah.
talking to you today, and that's it.
Yeah, that and the books. Okay, well that's good.
The book. I try to eat. I try to sleep. You know, those two kind of get put aside. But it's a big project, but it's a lot of fun. But I am going to be at the LA Times Festival of Books this coming weekend, April 21st and 20th and 21st. And then I teach it at workshops also. Okay. At writers' conferences.
Well, I think on that we're going to have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. That was a lot. Yeah.
That was a lot to unpack in a little bit of time. But It's always a pleasure talking to you. And
likewise.
Let's do it again.
Give out your website.
Sure. It is donnaconrad.com, and Facebook, Donna D. Conrad, and Instagram the same. And I do have a private Facebook group called the Magdalene Chronicles, which we go into more details about her and her life and women throughout the centuries.
Okay, sounds good. Well, always a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll probably have you back next year when the book 2 comes out.
That would be great. I look forward to it.
All right, thanks again. Nice talking to you.
And talking to you.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Jayna Locke. Hi, Jayna. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you, Douglas?
Doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you
Happy
here.
to be here.
So you've got a book out called Somewhere in Minnesota, and I see that you went to the University of New Hampshire. That's the one in Durham?
Correct. That's right.
Yeah, I lived in New Hampshire for 20 years, so I'm pretty familiar with the state. Yeah.
It's a lovely state.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I do kind of miss it, but I don't miss the long, cold winter. I moved from there in 2005, so it's been a while, and haven't been back since, actually, but it is a nice place.
So you live somewhere warmer now, I hope?
Well, I live in Las Vegas now, so it's certainly warmer.
Oh, okay. Well, don't visit Minnesota in the winter if you don't like harsh, cold weather.
Actually, Minnesota's probably colder than New Hampshire, I would think, yeah?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We can get to 40 below zero, not uncommonly, actually.
Yeah.
At least for those cold snaps that happen.
So aside from this book, which is your new book, what other things have you published?
I have several articles, or short stories. That is on in literary magazines, and I also. It's funny because I say some of my publications chose me. I write really in the literary genre typically. But I do have a few short stories in some thriller anthologies, which is really fun. And I just happened to be involved with some groups of writers that invited me to join them. And so I ended up producing some, kind of mystery thriller type of pieces. So yeah, everything I've done so far is short stories.
So
this new book, it's just brand new. The Somewhere in Minnesota, it's like just live on Amazon today.
Oh, okay.
So, brand new, yeah.
So this is your first published novel then?
It is a collection of short stories.
Oh, okay. Why don't you give us kind of an overview of it so people have some idea of what it is if they're interested in buying it?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a fun little blurb on the back, and it just kind of gives some teasers about some of the different, things that happen in short stories, in the collection. So I would say that in addition to having Minnesota and the seasons and lakes and so on as kind of the backdrop, what it also has in common is just the human experience. And so I'm hoping that anyone can relate to these stories, whether they have any relation to Minnesota, have ever been to Minnesota, know anything about Minnesota or not. And so what I love about short stories is that they can kind of look at the human experience from many different angles. You can kind of dive into one person's story, one person's experience, and kind of how, what is it that is bringing us to this moment for this character experiencing these things right now, and how does it get resolved in the end? So obviously with any story, you need, some kind of compelling character or some, kind of tragic or challenging experience, something that they're going through right now. And so all of these stories have that in common, and just kind of that sense of, just the human experience and the things that we go through, the things that we experience that cause us, pain and longing and suffering and, different ways of experiencing love and so on. So it's all of those things.
So are the stories related to your life in any way? Were these things that might have happened to you?
Well, I would say that is probably true of all writers, that something about what they write, comes from their personal experience. So I'll just give you one example. So
Okay.
I had a near-death experience as a 2-year-old. And I mean, a quite horrible experience. I ran out into the road and was actually hit by a truck. So I feel very fortunate to be alive. Well, one of the stories in this collection is about a toddler, same age, about 2 years old, who walks out onto a sheet of thin ice. A lake, because here in Minnesota, our lakes freeze solid. You can drive a truck across a lake here. But when spring comes and the lakes start to melt, you have to clear all the trucks and all the ice houses off of the lake, and everybody has to stay off of it. And, it'll still support some ducks and geese and things for a while, and maybe a small toddler, but you do not want a toddler going out onto that thin ice. And so what do the parents do when that happens? So, I mean, it's not, I've never experienced that in particular scenario, but I would have to say that it's kind of related back in some way to what happened to me as a toddler. So if that makes sense.
How much of that do you remember? I mean, 2 years old.
Right. Not very much. What I remember is what I think drives this child to go out onto the lake, which is he's chasing his ball. He's got this ball, it's blown by the wind out onto the lake, and it's this fun chase to try to get it. He finally knows how to run, right? He can finally do this, and it's a fresh kind of day, and they're finally getting to go outside after the long winter, and he runs down onto the lake, and because he has that desire to get to that ball, right? And that is all I remember is the longing that I had to get across the street, because my brother and my sisters were playing with the neighbors on the other side. So my mother must have gotten distracted. Pretty sure she was pregnant with my younger sister at the time, and probably I don't know, reading a novel or something. I slipped away and ran across the street. So that's really the only commonality there, is that sense of longing, and why that would drive somebody to do something very dangerous.
Well, so when that happened, where was everybody? They were in the house?
My mother was, my father was at work, and my siblings were across the street playing with the neighbors, and so that's where I wanted to be, where all the fun stuff was happening with the kids.
Well, you called it a near death. I mean, I assume you were taken to the hospital, and were you unconscious for a period of time?
Yes. Yep, and I had to wear a body cast for, 6 weeks or something.
Oh, God.
So, but yeah, I don't know. Little ones are bounceable. I was very fortunate that I survived that and got through it. And but yeah, all the stories probably have something that comes from my life in some way, but they're not about my life at all. What I would say, really what drives stories for me is that question of what if. What if a toddler walks out onto a melting lake? What do the parents do? What if, you're a 12-year-old boy living with your mom and your sisters, and somebody knocks at the door, and you open it and you see this ragged bum on the doorstep, and then you realize, oh, that's Dad. It's so I love those what if questions. And so, for example, that story, which is called Prodigal Father, it takes me to a place where I think, what if I was a 12-year-old boy, and of course I think back to how my childhood was at that age. What was it like to, go run around in the yard and things like that, to have a dog, a family dog. And so that's how life experience really tucks into short stories. I'm not a 12-year-old boy, never have been, but I told that story. So I don't know if that makes sense. But that's kind of where short stories come from, is this sort of interweaving of personal experience and, those what-if questions and creativity and imagination and overheard conversations and all the things around us. And so as I go through my life and my day, I jot down notes about things that I find interesting, interesting in how people interact with one another, interesting in terms of, I just got back from a trip last night. I'm standing there in the airport and I'm watching certain people's behaviors, and I think, what is that person's story? Where did they come from? Are they coming back here to greet somebody? Are they coming here for a visit? Their grandchildren, are they reuniting with people they haven't seen for a long time? And so all those things in my, for me as a creative, kind of launch story ideas. And so I just capture those, and I never know where they're going to go. So for example, one of my stories is about a woman taking a trip to Italy. She's escaping this horrible, horrible marriage failure, ends up in Italy. It's just kind of where she ran to. And it's at that very moment in time when the COVID-19 epidemic was becoming a pandemic, and Italy was an epicenter of that, that kind of explosion of the virus. And so what if you were a person who was traveling to Italy when that happened? What would that be like? So, it's capturing these kinds of ideas and experiences through one person's telling and viewpoint and story.
So is the common theme here that everybody is from Minnesota, or that the stories all begin or have some connection to Minnesota? Yes. And so, for example, with the woman who travels to, she goes to Lucca, Italy. She does end up coming back. But she yearns for her life back in Minnesota that she had to abandon because of the horrible marriage. Oh, okay. Well, we're just running out of time. We got about 2 minutes left. What's next for you? Are you going to do another collection of short stories, or are you going to do...
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I have another short story collection well underway. Unlike the first one, which is really kind of literary fiction, these will be more genre stories. As I indicated, I've written some thrillers and things like that. I've started writing ghost stories and some magical realism. And so this next collection will actually take place in a fictional town in Minnesota that I've invented. All of them take place there. It's actually a college town on the Mississippi River. And so that's my next project. It's called the Wimden Chronicles, and so hoping to get that out maybe a year from now.
Are you a full-time author? I mean, is this what you do for a living, or do you have something else that you do?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah,
that would be lovely.
Certainly.
No, I actually am a content strategist, content director, working in high tech.
Well, we do need to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on. The book is called Somewhere in Minnesota, and my guest is Jayna Locke. You said the book released today, right?
Yes, it's now available for purchase on Amazon. We're actually considering April 26th, the formal launch date. But that story, that book, and also all of my short stories that are already published are available on my website. So if people want to learn more, and of course that's where I will pre-announce my next book as well.
Okay, you want to give out your website?
Yeah, sure. It's just my first and last name, www.jaynalocke.com. JAYNALOCKE.
Well, Jayna, we got to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on, and best
Thank
of luck.
you.
Hope the book does well.
Thank you so much.